This is Mission Control Houston. We want to welcome you to today's Space Station Live. It is Monday, October 28th, 2013. This is a live view inside the Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center. This team here being led by Flight Director Emily Nelson this morning. Sitting beside her is Leslie Ringo, that is the Capcom, talking with the crew today. Of course, the main news of today is the Albert Einstein Automated Transfer Vehicle, ATV-4, that is the European cargo craft, has departed the International Space Station. That took place earlier this morning at 3:55 a.m. Central Time. As we take a look back at the video from this morning, this spacecraft had brought up more than 7 tons of food, fuel, and supplies to the station's residents as it slowly backed away from the Zvezda service module, that is the aft portion of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. Now that ATV has departed, it is packed full of trash and other items that the crew no longer needed, and it will be deorbited coming up this weekend on November 2nd. There's a couple of different deorbit burns that are planned, one at 3:36 a.m. Central Time, the other one at 6:28 a.m. Central Time, and that will signal the end of ATV-4. All of that activity this morning went according to plan. So now that Zvezda service module on the back end of the Russian segment is set up to have a Soyuz relocated over there coming up in just a few short days at the end of this week. Fyodor Yurchikhin, Luca Parmitano, and Karen Nyberg will be relocating their Soyuz. That is the Soyuz that brought them up to the station back in May. Is going to serve as the ride home coming up on November the 10th here in America. They're going to relocate that from the current Rassvet module over to Zvezda to make way for the upcoming Soyuz activities that are coming up in just a couple of weeks. Also on board today, Oleg Kotov is working to tear down some of the equipment that was used for this morning's ATV activities on Zvezda. He's going to be reinstalling some equipment on that port to get it set up for that upcoming Soyuz relocation. Also on board, Mike Hopkins, the NASA flight engineer, is taking part in the spinal ultrasound experiment today. This is one of the onboard research activities. He uses ultrasound technology to take measurements of the crew members' spines. The goal of the experiment is to help determine and to help better predict what kind of changes happen to the spinal cord whenever the crews are up on orbit. They tend to get a little bit taller than what they are here on the planet. Crews have seen up to a 3% increase in height while in space, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it can cause some lower back pain and other muscle issues. So what they do is try to predict exactly what causes that and to help understand how different bodies react to being up in space. So that ultrasound will be used later on today on Mike Hopkins. Hopkins also going to be taking part in some inspection of some of the spacewalk gear that's inside the station, mainly the tethers that are used to secure the astronauts to the outside of the station whenever they're outside doing a spacewalk. They do these checks of the equipment and the Quest airlock from time to time just to make sure that everything is in proper working order and ready to support future spacewalks when we get ready to do those once again. Karen Nyberg is working to install a humidifier in the cell biology experiment rack today that is in the Kibo laboratory. She'll also be working with Hopkins on the spinal ultrasound experiment as well. Of course, Nyberg, as well as Luca Parmitano and Fyodor Yurchikhin, getting ready to come home. Their time aboard the space station is rapidly coming to a close, but of course we're going to do things a little bit out of order. Typically what we do is have a landing and then a launch, but because of the upcoming 9-person crew on board the space station, as well as the Olympic torch that is coming up, we're going to be doing a launch first. So down now, getting ready for launch, is the upcoming crew of Mikhail Turin, Rick Mastracchio, and Koichi Wakata. They are going to be launching on November the 6th. That launch will take place as those three head up into space at 10:14 p.m. Central Time on November the 6th. Here's a look at all of our programming that's coming up as we offer live coverage of those activities. So again, launch at 10:14 p.m. Central Time. Our docking coverage will begin that night, or that morning rather, at 3:45 a.m. Central Time on November the 7th. Docking will take place at 4:31 a.m. Central Time. Hatch opening coverage will begin at 6:15 a.m. Central Time, with the actual hatch opening taking place at 6:40 a.m. Central Time. And at that point, we'll have 9 people on board the space station. That is something we've not had in quite a number of months and years, so it'll be exciting to see 9 people on board the space station. After that takes place, there'll be a spacewalk, and then The crew of Nyberg and Parmitano and Yurchikhin will come home. Their landing is due to take place on Sunday, November the 10th. They will physically undock from the space station at 5:26 p.m. Central Time on November the 10th. There will be a separation burn that will take place at 5:29 to back them away from the space station. The deorbit burn will take place at 7:56 p.m. Central Time with a landing at 8:50 p.m. Central Time. Of course, they're going to be landing in Kazakhstan as is traditional. They will be outside of the southernmost city of Karaganda, and preparations are underway to get ready to support that crew as they return back home to Earth after almost 6 months up in space.
Okay, copy that, and I'm not sure when we'll get to that, but we'll let you know.
And that sounds like a good plan, and we'll check the offline question as well.
Thank you. And Houston Station on 2 for SSCs.
And we're here with you on 2.
Yeah, Leslie, is there a reason why it has to be SSC 8, or could it be SSC 5 or a different one?
And checking. And Hopper, that's a good question. We'll take which one you want to give us.
Okay, copy that, and I'll get back with you which one we do the swap on.
This is Mission Control Houston. As we were mentioning, a brand new crew is getting ready to head up to the International Space Station. Mikhail Tyurin, Rick Mastracchio, and Koichi Wakata have departed for the launch site down at the Baikonur Cosmodrome. We're going to take a look at some of the video footage that just arrived to us here on NASA television right now.
Good morning. Hello. Good morning. Good morning. Good to see you. So, the head of the construction for the government. So we would like to invite you to come and visit us. Good luck. Thank you. Thank you. That's it. Ready. Hello. Good morning. We're not breathing. Try not to shake too hard. We don't have Savin here. Let's not rush. In order. Let's get inside. The prime crew invites everybody inside.
I got the wrong side. Huh? I got on the wrong side. You guys on the wrong side? Yeah, let's do
it. Okay, let's gather together. All right. And I'll be standing by.
Catching up fast.
What's he doing? Okay, shall we have the microphones? In the middle. Stand in the middle. Please don't be in the way. Prime crew families should be here.
Так, пожалуйста, внимание.
All right, please look at me.
Не, много.
Too much, too far.
Так, пожалуйста, внимание.
Okay, please look at me.
И еще раз.
And once again. Should we arrange ourselves somehow? No, one crew to the right, one crew to the left. Let's Photoshop it. Okay, please look at me. Attention. Thank you. And now the families.
Hi. いよいよだなと感じています。これからバイコヌールに移動してからピットチェックですとか打ち上げのための大切なステップが待ってますので、それらを一つ一つこなして、打ち上げに臨みたいなという気持ちです。
Thank you. Any more questions?
NASA TV for Rick Mastracchio. How will you be spending your days down in Baikonur now that you're less than 2 weeks to launch?
So yeah, good question. On Monday we'll have a fit check where we'll actually put on our Sokol suits and climb into the Soyuz vehicle and strap in just to see what that's all about. We have some training down there, and we'll talk a lot about launch preparations and launch itself, and then of course the big day we'll be ready for launch.
Thank you. And what language are you going to speak? Well, you know, what can I say? The Olympic torch is a very interesting thing on the station, and it's very interesting to be a part of it, and we'll do our best with everything entrusted to us. Is it something out of the ordinary? Of course. Are you going to take pictures with it? What are you going to be doing with it? Well, we are not doing a spacewalk with it. We will deliver it on orbit,
и отдадим следующему.
and we'll hand it over to the next crew.
Это будет огонь или это будет просто...
Is it going to be like a flame or just a torch? We'll see.
Двиньтесь назад, двиньтесь назад.
Please move back, move back.
Пока нет.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is Mission Control Houston. Again, that was a look as the upcoming crew, Mikhail Turin, Rick Mastracchio, and Koichi Wakata departed for the Baikonur Cosmodrome. You also saw some familiar faces in there as well. Alexei Leonov was in there. That was the first human to do a spacewalk. And Valentina Tereshkova was also making an appearance in there. Of course, she was the first female in space back in the 1960s. Here's a live view outside the space station as it heads into orbital darkness, the sun beginning to set on the orbiting complex while it's 260 miles above the face of the Earth, about to make a pass over parts of Central Asia and the Indian Ocean. The crew is busy on board right now, working throughout the entire space station on quite a number of different activities. Fyodor Yurchikhin, who is the current commander of Expedition 37, is working on some crew departure preparations as he and Karen Nyberg and Luca Parmitano get ready to come back home in just a few short weeks. They basically begin the process of packing up items that are going to come home with them, just like you would if you're going to take a trip here on Earth. There's Karen Nyberg and Luca Parmitano. As you can see, they're both in their exercise gear. Nyberg is in the middle of a session on the advanced resistive exercise device. That's sort of the weightlifting machine that they use up on orbit. Parmitano just wrapped up his activity on the treadmill inside the station. In addition to all of that, they've got a fancy word called the cycle ergometer. It's basically a stationary bicycle that they use there in the space station. While they're doing that, Mike Hopkins is busy in the Quest airlock working on some of those spacewalk tools that we talked about at the beginning of the broadcast. Sergei Ryazanskiy is working in the Russian segment on some of the experiments that are being run back there. And then Oleg Kotov actually is in the middle of an exercise session as well right now. So it's a busy day as typical for the Expedition 37 crew. Of course, things are going to be getting quite a bit busier coming up in the next several days. That launch of Wakata, Mastracchio, and Turin coming up first. That's going to be on November 6th. As we talked about, that launch time is at 10:14 p.m. Central Time. You see our entire coverage there on the screen. Our launch coverage will actually begin at 9:15 p.m. Central Time on Wednesday, November 6th. Launch again 10:14. And then going into the overnight hours at 3:45 a.m. Central Time, that is when we'll have docking coverage as that crew gets up to the space station pretty quick after just 4 orbits for about 6 hours. Docking taking place at 4:31 a.m. Central Time. And then our hatch opening coverage will begin at 6:15 a.m. Central Time, with the actual hatch opening taking place at 6:40. And then we'll have video file footage of all of that beginning at 8 a.m. Central Time for those of you that did not feel like staying up overnight. We'll have all the different highlights of the activities as the crews greet one another. And for the first time in an extremely long time, we have 9 crew members on board at one time. Of course, that Soyuz that is going to be bringing up 3 brand new crew members is also bringing up sort of an extra crew member in the form of the Olympic torch. That torch is going to be brought up It'll be taken out on a spacewalk by our Russian colleagues in a ceremonial spacewalk, and then it will be put back into the Soyuz that will take home Fyodor Yurchikhin, Luca Parmitano, and Karen Nyberg, and they will basically hand deliver that Olympic torch back on Earth once they land in Kazakhstan. There's a look at the crew that is wrapping up their final days aboard the space station. As you can tell, they're going to have a busy time during their final days, but they are due to land on Sunday, November 10th at about 8:50 p.m. Central Time. And now that will be at 8:50 a.m. there at the landing site. They will actually physically separate from the space station at 5:26 p.m. Central Time on November the 10th. They will have a separation burn that's about 15 seconds long that will back them away from the International Space Station. That'll take place at 5:29.
You notice that all the other SSCs have DVD players in it.
And we copy 8. Thanks, Luca.
And then once that separation burn takes place, they'll have a deorbit burn that'll be 4 minutes 46 seconds in length. It'll slow them down 128 meters per second. That'll take place at 7:56 p.m. Central Time, and that will begin the process of re-entering them into the Earth's atmosphere. Entry interface will take place at 8:27 p.m. Central Time. The command will be sent to open the parachute at 8:35. And then landing will take place again at 8:50 p.m. Central Time. As we mentioned, that'll be 8:50 a.m. Central Time there at the landing site. That's going to be 30 minutes after sunrise. So this crew will actually be re-entering into the dark, basically, as they cross over and prepare for landing just outside of the city of Zhezkazgan. It'll be just to the southeast of that city. And the landing forces will be there in force to greet this crew as they get back on Earth after almost 6 months of being up in space. The easiest way to follow along with all of our different programming that we have coming up with this Soyuz relocation coming up at the end of this week, the launch and landing of these crews, as well as the spacewalk, is just log on to the NASA website. Just go to www.nasa.gov/NTV or /station. If you want to take a look at the specific NASA television schedule, just go to nasa.gov/NTV. We also have a link for you there on the station page. But if you look on the left-hand side of the NASA TV page, look for Live Events TV schedule, and you can find out all the different programming times that we have coming up as we get ready to bring you live coverage of a fairly busy November for both us and the crew on board the space station. The space station is going to be outside of video and audio communications with us here in Mission Control for the next 20 minutes or so. So while we have a moment, we're going to show you some background on the upcoming crew. Koichi Wakata from the JAXA, that is the Japanese Space Agency, Rick Mastracchio from NASA, and Mikhail Turin from the Russian Federal Space Agency, Roscosmos. This video will talk a little bit about their backgrounds and what brought them to be a part of this upcoming mission, and also their histories. All three of these are experienced space flyers.
The newest members of the International Space Station crew are veteran space flyers, all eager for another opportunity to make a contribution to the future of human exploration. Dr. Koichi Wakata was born and raised in Saitama, a bedroom community of Tokyo. He remembers watching the first moon landing on television and wishing he could fly in space. But since there were no Japanese astronauts then, he put the dream aside as impractical. But he had other interests, including baseball and airplanes.
I was very fascinated by airplanes ever since I was a small boy, and I always wanted to become an engineer or pilot to make and fly an airplane.
Wakata pursued that dream at Kyushu University, where he earned a bachelor's degree in aeronautical engineering and a master's in applied mechanics, and then started his career as a structural engineer for Japan Airlines. 2 years later, when Japan's space agency advertised for astronaut candidates, Wakata applied and was selected in 1992 to begin astronaut training at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. In 1996, he was Japan's first ever space shuttle mission specialist on a flight where he ran the shuttle's robot arm to deploy and retrieve satellites. In 2000, he used his robotics expertise again on the shuttle flight that installed the Z-1 truss and a pressurized mating adapter on the International Space Station. After he finished his doctorate in aeronautical engineering from Kyushu University in 2004, he completed training in Russia as a Soyuz spacecraft flight engineer, and then in 2009 became Japan's first space station crew member as a part of expeditions 18, 19, and 20, and expanded his robotics repertoire to include Canadarm2, Dexter, and the robotic arm on Japan's Kibo laboratory module. He's eager to keep doing what he can to prepare the way for future exploration and improve life on Earth.
I think we can gain new knowledge, new technologies that we benefit in our daily life on the ground by going to space. And also, I strongly believe human space program is a vehicle for the survival of human species.
Michael Turin was born in Kolomna, Russia, an historical town outside Moscow. But he lived in many places around the country, growing up in a military family. His interest in spaceflight did not focus on becoming a cosmonaut himself.
I did not have a period of my life when I was dreaming and doing all I could, overcoming difficulties to become a cosmonaut. I just loved this area.
And he focused on getting as close to it as he could. Turin earned a degree in engineering from the Moscow Aviation Institute and went right to work for the Rocket Space Corporation Energia as an engineer, first specializing in ballistics and software development, and later in methods of training cosmonauts, methods he usually tried out on himself first. After 9 years on the job, he was selected to join the Cosmonaut Corps. Turin made 3 spacewalks during his first trip to the International Space Station in 2001 as a flight engineer on Expedition 3, and 2 more EVAs as flight engineer on Expedition 14 in 2006 and 2007. He's pleased to be contributing to physiological research that will prepare humans for future space exploration, and even more interested in how some of the psychological results will be applied on Earth.
They can be used not just in space exploration, but can be propagated and applied to human relations in general, and much more in demand in various areas of our human activity, human life.
Rick Mastracchio is a native of Waterbury, Connecticut, and grew up there in the 1960s, interested in the space program, but not with the idea that he'd ever fly in space himself.
When I was a small kid, I didn't know you could even be an astronaut. It never occurred to me I could be an astronaut someday. But I was always interested in math and science. I was always interested when the teacher spoke about aviation-related topics or space science-related topics, when I was in grade school.
He took those interests to the University of Connecticut, the first person in his family ever to go to college, and earned a Bachelor of Science degree in electrical engineering and computer science, which got him a job at Hamilton Standard developing guidance and flight control systems, while he finished a Master's of Science in electrical engineering at Rensselaer Polytechnic. At that time, he saw an ad from NASA looking for new astronauts and decided to apply. What he got was a job offer from Rockwell to work in shuttle operations, and he moved to Houston in 1987. 3 years later, he joined NASA as an engineer specializing in software development, then became a flight controller in ascent and entry guidance and procedures, and was selected as an astronaut in 1996 after 9 years of applying. His first space shuttle flight was the 2000 mission that outfitted the International Space Station's new Zvezda module for its first permanent crew. He made 3 spacewalks during his second trip to the station in 2007 on a mission that delivered a truss segment and a new gyroscope, and 3 more EVAs on a 2010 resupply mission. He sees this station as a means to support inevitable exploration well beyond the neighborhood of this blue planet.
We are meant to explore, we being the people here on this planet Earth. We want to go out and see what's out there. We want to know more about things, and we can't just do that through robotic systems. We have to send people to see things up close and personal.
This is Mission Control Houston. This is a live view from the Neutral Buoyancy Laboratory. That is the 6.2 million gallon swimming pool that we've got here in Houston, just down the road from the Johnson Space Center. Of course, this is where the crews practice upcoming spacewalks and training underwater. Today in the pool is NASA astronaut Scott Kelly and European Space Agency astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti, who are preparing for Expedition 42. These crews not only train for specific tasks that they have scheduled for spacewalks, but also just generic training, just getting outside and moving up and down the space station structure that is submerged there in the pool to practice sort of a list of items that are typical whenever the crew steps outside. Of course, Scott Kelly is an experienced spacewalker, having been up in space numerous times. This will be the first time Cristoforetti has flown in space, so she's getting her feet wet, per se, getting into the pool and moving around the station structure and learning the different handholds, the different techniques that the crews have to use whenever they're outside, the different tethering techniques that they're required to do to make sure that they are secure to the space station. But that what you're looking at right there is a mock-up of the Quest airlock. You can sort of make out where the crew is moving around right up above their heads there. That is the opening of the Quest airlock. That is where they move outside of the space station. That's sort of the hatch that they exit the spacecraft on. And they just practice moving from point A to point B with their tools there floating behind them. Of course, Scott Kelly is going to be a member of the year-long expedition. Along with Mikhail Kornienko, they're going to be launching in 2015. They will spend 1 year in space. That'll be the longest time that a NASA astronaut has been up there. The Russian side has several different people that are a member of that Hall of Fame. But this is designed to teach scientists on the ground exactly how the human body reacts to being up in space for that amount of time. The hope is we can learn these lessons now using the space station, so that will teach us what we need to know to hopefully go to an asteroid or onto Mars one of these days. Of course, those missions are going to be quite a bit longer than a space station journey. So Scott Kelly, Mikhail Kornienko will be undertaking that mission coming up in 2015. If you watched our coverage this past Friday, you saw Mike Hopkins and Karen Nyberg up on board the space station working on that spacesuit that Luca Parmitano had worn back in July that leaked water inside his helmet. The crew on board the space station has been working very closely with the engineering teams as well as the Mishap Investigation Board that have been running sort of parallel paths to try to find out exactly what caused that water leak. They've been moving down through a very systematic fault tree, just checking off the items that could have caused that problems, doing some investigation, and then eliminating the possibilities one by one. They were operating on a piece of the suit that was a little bit complicated to remove, but it's called the fan pump separator. What this does is it's a series of pieces of equipment inside the spacesuit that help separate the water vapor that accumulates inside the air that's circulated inside the suit. It also circulates the water inside the suit to keep the crew and the suit itself cool. But they believe that that could be the root cause, possibly, of the water leak that they saw. So what was happening is that Mike Hopkins not only removed that piece and replaced it with a brand new part, but also tested out the spacesuit itself, and the crew did see no more leaks whenever they did that. So of course that is good news. Now that does not spell total victory quite yet, as the engineering teams and the flight control teams and the managers down here need to take a really hard look at everything, especially once this part comes back to Earth aboard the Soyuz that Nyberg, Parmitano, and Yurchikhin will be riding. But that part will be returned to Houston for investigation, and then the engineering team and the Mishap board should be able to come up with a final root cause and declare this situation complete and resolved. But we're going to take a look at some of the footage that occurred on Friday as Mike Hopkins did sort of an operation on the heart and lungs of this spacesuit. This is Mission Control Houston. Again, this is footage from Friday as Mike Hopkins there on the left side of the screen was operating on this spacesuit. This is the one that Luca Parmitano had worn back in July. That was the cause of the water leak. Hopkins had spent the better part of his day on Friday removing the fan pump circulator piece of equipment that's in there. They do believe that this may be the root cause of the leak, but he did replace that with a brand new part and turn the suit back on with that new fan pump separator inside, and he did radio down to the ground teams that he saw no more water, which of course is good news.
Okay, Steve, I show 30 minutes are up.
Okay, and you've performed your inspection. Do you have anything to report?
I see no water at any of the vent ports of the FPS areas. I don't see any water at all.
All right, thanks, Mike. And while that may have looked like nothing happened to most people, that may have been the most exciting 30-minute show I've watched in months. So you have a go to pick up in step 36.3.
Okay, copy that. I don't know if it's congratulations or too early, but well done to the folks down there.
Thanks, they appreciate it.
Hey, and I did have the one quick question for you. In 36.3, I take the O2 actuator to off, and since we've already primed the pump, it's okay if that it takes longer than 2 minutes before the fan goes off.
And Mike, that is correct. You are okay if it takes longer than 2 minutes. And thank you for all your hard work the past couple of days. And you have a little bit more to do here, and you can get to it.
Copy.
Again, that was Mike Hopkins on board the space station this past Friday as he finished up some work on that spacesuit that Luca Parmitano had worn back in July that had leaked water up into the helmet. He had swapped out what is known as the fan pump separator. This is sort of what they like to call the heart and the lungs of the spacesuit. It circulates some water inside the suit to keep things cool, also circulates some air, and helps remove water vapor that could accumulate from the crew member breathing inside from that air. And they believe that that may be the nexus or the cause of the possible water leak, the possible cause of the water leak that Luca Parmitano did have to go through back in July. Now, what happens next before everybody declares victory is that specific part that Mike Hopkins pulled out, the fan pump separator, will come back home aboard the Soyuz that Fyodor Yurchikhin, Luca Parmitano, and Karen Nyberg will be flying in on November the 10th. And then it will be put on a NASA plane and brought back to Houston shortly after landing. Once it gets back, they will take a look at it and do some sort of forensic examination of that piece of equipment. And once everybody's comfortable with the fact that that may have been the cause of the leak, then we should be wrapping up that investigation. There is a separate investigation taking place. It is a mishap investigation board, an MIB as it is known by its acronym. This MIB is taking a look at the larger lessons learned that we can gain from this incident that happened back in July. And that final report should be done before the end of the year. So the main goal for the space station program is to get back into what is known as a contingency spacewalk stance. This means that the crew would go outside and repair any sort of accidental damage or any sort of system failure that could happen to the space station. If something went wrong outside or one of the parts outside failed, they could be cleared to go outside and do that. Of course, that's more of an emergency scenario. So the goal is to get back up and running in terms of that. And then once all this investigation is done on the engineering side and the mishap investigation board side, then we should be able to get back into a stance of doing routine and normal spacewalks like what Chris Cassidy and Luca Parmitano were doing back in July. when they were outside the station. Of course, we'll have all the latest for you on that as those situations develop. Right now, the space station is just to the south of Australia, currently in orbital night, so the sun is down on it. The crew is busy doing some exercise sessions on board. They've got some more of that coming up later on this afternoon. They've got their daily planning conference coming up in about a half hour, about 11:30 a.m. Central Time. There's Parmitano on that stationary bicycle inside the Destiny laboratory. He is doing his afternoon workout session. And then he and Karen Nyberg and Fyodor Yurchikhin have some crew departure activities coming up this afternoon, basically just getting everything ready to go for the return to Earth. There's some items they have to locate and pack up just like you would for a trip here on Earth, and then all will be set for their landing coming up on Sunday, November 10th. Their landing is currently scheduled for the evening of September the 10th here in the United States. It's going to be the morning of November the 11th there at the landing site. But the landing time right now is 8:50 p.m. Central Time, 9:50 p.m. Eastern Time. That's going to be 6:50 a.m. in Moscow and 8:50 a.m. as we mentioned there at the landing site. They're going to be landing just to the southeast of Zhezkazgan. You can see the map here. You know, there's two different landing cities that we typically target. There's the city of Kustanai, which is up there at the north, and the city of Karaganda down there at the south. Those are the two main landing sites. There are two smaller cities that the landing teams do sort of stage out of, usually the night before landing. If we are operating out of the city of Kustanai, then we head down to the city of Arkelik for that. But since we're going to be in the city of Karaganda, the southern city of Karaganda for this landing, the recovery forces will be staging out of the city of Zhezkazgan. That puts them about 45 minutes by helicopter flight from the actual landing site itself. Of course, the weather this time of year has already gotten a little bit chilly. Temperatures probably going to be in the 20s Fahrenheit at the time of landing, which, speaking from experience, is basically a warm front for that time of year over there. And usually there's some snow and some much colder temperatures, so 20 degrees is not all that bad, relatively speaking. As we get ready to wrap up our coverage here on NASA Television, we want to remind you that the video file is coming up next here on NASA Television beginning at 11 a.m. Central Time or noon Eastern. If you missed any of that footage that we aired at the beginning of the broadcast of Koichi Wakata, Rick Mastracchio, and Mikhail Turin departing over the weekend for the Baikonur Cosmodrome as they get ready to head down to the launch site for final preparations for their launch coming up in just a few short days. That will air as part of today's video file beginning at 11 a.m. Central Time and throughout the day here on NASA Television. It's pretty good footage of the crew as they got ready to depart the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center just outside of Moscow and head down to Baikonur. Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space, was there to say farewell to the crew, as well as Alexei Leonov, who was the first person to ever conduct a spacewalk back in the 1960s. We will also have, here on NASA Television tomorrow, an in-flight event with the crew on board the space station. That'll be at noon Central Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time, just after we conclude our coverage here on NASA Television. We will have our space station live at the typical time of 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. But that in-flight event will air live here on NASA Television beginning at noon p.m. Central Time, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That event's going to be with the University of Illinois engineering students. They're going to be talking with Mike Hopkins, who, of course, is an alumni of that school. We'll have live coverage of that here on NASA Television. So that is going to wrap it up for us for today, Monday, October 28th, 2013. We want to thank you for joining us. The crew is going to be busy for the rest of the day, working on their afternoon activities, including a little bit of science. As we mentioned, they've got a couple of more afternoon exercise sessions for a couple of the crew members. They will have their daily planning conference coming up in about a half hour, where they will talk with the different ground teams around the world to talk about the day's activities, to talk about any questions that popped up, and also plan ahead for tomorrow. Emily Nelson, the flight director here in Mission Control, and her team will be on console for just a few more hours, and then they will hand over to Orbit 3, and that crew will be responsible for planning tomorrow's activities and whatever is on schedule for the crew for Tuesday. For all of the latest on the International Space Station, including all the different science activities that the crew is working on, you can look it up by expedition or by experiment name. Just log on to the NASA website. Just go to www.nasa.gov/station. You can read the daily update there, take a look at any of the photos and videos that we downlink and upload every day. If you look on the left-hand side, there's Researching Technology. That's where you can dig into all the different science that the crew is working on. You can also find out where the space station is passing over your home city to see if you can see it up in the early morning or early evening night skies. If you've never done that, we of course encourage you to do it. It is quite a spectacular sight to see. So we will see you back here tomorrow at 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 a.m. Eastern Time here on NASA Television and NASA.gov for tomorrow's Space Station Live. Until then, this is Mission Control Houston.